Ford is one of the most storied automakers in history, responsible for some of the most beloved vehicles on the road. But the company's legacy isn't without dark chapters. Over the decades, several Ford cars that killed many Americans, injuries and fatalities, whether due to design flaws, mechanical failures, or reckless engineering decisions. These cars may have looked impressive on the showroom floor, but they proved deadly on the streets. Here are the 10 craziest Ford cars that killed many Americans.
Dear viewer, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for your support.
Number 10. When the Ford Mustang debuted in April 1964, it didn't just launch a new car, it launched a movement. This was the car that defined an entire category, the pony car. Stylish, affordable, and fast, the Mustang was the fantasy machine for a whole generation of Americans. But beneath the chrome and glory, the first-generation Mustang also carried a dark legacy: raw power without refinement, light rear traction, and a reputation for deadly crashes, especially among inexperienced drivers. Ford's marketing genius was clear from day one. The 1964.5 Mustang offered sports car looks at an economy car price, built on the humble Falcon platform. It was an instant sensation, selling over 400,000 units in its first year, a record at the time. Young drivers loved it. They could finally own something that looked like a Corvette but cost half as much. The Mustang quickly became the symbol of youthful freedom, suburban success, and the thrill of the open road. However, that freedom came with risks. The base six-cylinder models were easy to drive, but as buyers began opting for V8 engines like the 289, 302, and later the 390 and 428 Cobra Jet, the Mustang's personality changed from friendly pony to barely tamed stallion. Ford gave the Mustang big power early on, but its chassis and suspension weren't ready to handle it. The car's short wheelbase and light rear end made it prone to oversteer and loss of traction, especially when drivers punched the throttle mid-turn. Inexperienced drivers, many of them teenagers or young adults, found themselves in over their heads. Rear tires would break loose, the car would fishtail, and in an era before traction control or stability systems, the results were often disastrous. Accident statistics from the late 1960s showed that Mustang crash and fatality rates were significantly higher than for other cars in its class. Insurance companies took notice, slapping performance models like the GT and Mach 1 with steep premiums. By 1967, the Mustang had grown in size and power. The Shelby GT350 and GT500 versions were high-performance monsters, and the Boss 429 of 1969 took things to near race car levels. But even as performance climbed, safety lagged behind. These cars had drum brakes in the rear, soft suspension, and no crumple zones. Ford promoted the Mustang as an everyman sports car, but the truth was, only experienced drivers could truly control the high-powered variants. For example, the 428 Cobra Jet produced over 335 horsepower, underrated by Ford, and could rocket from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 6 seconds. Impressive for the time, but dangerously quick for average suburban roads. Many accidents happened when drivers misjudged the car's balance or overestimated their abilities. The Mustang became the ultimate pop culture car, featured in films like Bullitt, 1968 with Steve McQueen, where its chase scenes cemented the Mustang as the symbol of cool rebellion. But it also became linked with recklessness. High-speed street races, drag strips, and weekend joyrides made Mustangs a fixture in accident reports. Its powerful engines, low cost, and youthful image made it the perfect storm for thrill-seeking drivers and tragic outcomes. By the early 1970s, insurance rates skyrocketed, and the muscle car market began collapsing. The Mustang's once glorious power was now viewed as a liability. The 1971 redesign made the Mustang larger and heavier, a response to federal regulations and consumer demand for comfort. Performance models like the Mach 1 still packed serious V8s, but the handling issues persisted. Only now the car had even more mass to control. Meanwhile, fuel crises and emissions regulations were looming. By 1973, the once wild Mustang had lost its edge. It was slower, tamer, and safer, but also less thrilling. This marked the end of the pure Mustang era, the years when the car's beauty and danger coexisted in equal measure. The 1964 through 1973 Mustang remains an icon, perhaps the most beloved American car of the 20th century. Yet it also serves as a cautionary tale about untamed performance. For many enthusiasts, this first generation represents the essence of driving: mechanical, visceral, alive. But for safety experts, it's a reminder of an era before technology could protect drivers from their own adrenaline. Even today, modern Mustangs carry echoes of this past. Rear-wheel drive, high horsepower, and driver bravado can still lead to disaster, a fact jokingly immortalized in the phrase "Mustang crowd control" in car culture memes. The 1964 through 1973 Ford Mustang was both America's dream and its danger. It represented freedom, speed, and rebellion, but also the consequences of giving too much power to too little car. For enthusiasts, it's still irresistible. The sound of the V8, the smell of gasoline, the long hood and short deck design. But its legacy reminds us that true driving passion demands respect, skill, and awareness. In short, the early Mustang was the car that taught America to love performance and fear it. It's an icon not just because it was beautiful or fast, but because it embodied the raw, unpredictable spirit of an era when cars had no filters, no limits, and no forgiveness.
Number 9. When Ford unveiled the Fairlane Thunderbolt in 1964, it wasn't just building another muscle car, it was building a weapon. This car existed for one purpose only: to dominate drag strips and showcase Ford's engineering might in the horsepower wars of the 1960s. But in its pursuit of speed, Ford created something that was too powerful, too raw, and too dangerous for public roads. By 1964, the Detroit Big Three, Ford, Chevrolet, and Chrysler, were locked in a battle for drag strip supremacy. Ford wanted to beat Chrysler's fearsome 426 Max wedge and the rising Hemi engines. Their answer was extreme. Take the mid-size Fairlane body, stuff in a 427 cubic inch V8, strip out all unnecessary weight, and build a car that could run the quarter mile in the 11-second range right off the factory line. Officially, the Thunderbolt was a Fairlane 500, but in truth, it was a purpose-built race car disguised as a production model. Ford made just enough, 100 units total, to satisfy NHRA's homologation rules. The car came with a VIN and license plates, technically making it street legal, but Ford never intended anyone to daily drive it. This was a dragster wearing a thin street disguise. Every detail of the Thunderbolt screamed performance at any cost. The 427 cubic inch high-riser V8 produced a conservative 425 horsepower, though in reality, the figure was closer to 500-plus horsepower when properly tuned. The engine featured aluminum heads, dual Holley 4-barrel carburetors, a massive ram air hood scoop, and competition-grade internals. To save weight, Ford used fiberglass hoods, doors, and fenders, a plexiglass windshield and side windows, no sound insulation, rear seats, or radio. Even the battery was relocated to the trunk to improve traction on launch, a common drag racing trick. The Thunderbolt weighed around 3,200 pounds, astonishingly light for a mid-size V8 car of the era. The result? Brutal acceleration. Quarter-mile times in the 11.5 to 12.0 second range were achievable right out of the box. On narrow bias-ply tires and leaf springs, that kind of power was borderline uncontrollable on normal pavement. Though Ford sold the Thunderbolt through its dealers, it came with warnings that bordered on disclaimers. The car had no warranty, no proper cooling for street use, and barely functional lighting and wipers. Some early owners, young enthusiasts who didn't fully grasp what they were buying, attempted to drive these cars on public roads. The results were often disastrous. The Thunderbolt's lightweight front end and extreme torque made it prone to lifting its front wheels off the ground under hard acceleration, and its brakes and suspension were nowhere near adequate for street driving. Several early reports describe crashes where the cars lost control under full throttle or failed to stop in time due to their race-oriented setup. Inexperienced drivers quickly discovered that this street-legal Ford was unforgiving and lethal outside a drag strip. Within months, the Thunderbolt earned a reputation as a widowmaker. Many dealers refused to sell them to ordinary buyers, offering them only to professional racers with verified experience. Ford's own internal discussions reportedly acknowledged the public safety risk, and by the end of 1964, production stopped at 100 units, with 49 automatics and 51 four-speeds. Yet, in the right hands, the Thunderbolt was a monster performer. It dominated NHRA superstock racing, often humiliating rival brands. Drivers who could handle its explosive launches and hair-trigger throttle had few rivals. But even seasoned racers described the Thunderbolt as terrifying. The combination of lightweight, primitive suspension, and enormous torque made it one of the most violent machines Ford ever unleashed. The Thunderbolt remains one of the most legendary and dangerous cars of the muscle car era. It symbolizes the peak of Detroit's obsession with raw, unfiltered power, before federal safety standards, emissions regulations, and liability concerns tamed the industry. Collectors today revere it as a holy grail, a rare artifact from when automakers sold near race cars to the public. But its history also serves as a warning. Engineering brilliance without restraint can cross the line into recklessness. Ford never built another car quite like the Thunderbolt again. Even the later Boss 429 Mustangs and Cobra Jets, while ferocious, were more civilized by comparison. The 1964 Ford Fairlane Thunderbolt was both a masterpiece and a menace. It achieved exactly what Ford intended, to dominate the drag strip. But it also revealed the danger of giving race car power to the general public. It was too fast for its own good, a car that blurred the line between competition and chaos. Few vehicles from the 1960s embody the extremes of that era: brilliant engineering, insane performance, and a complete disregard for safety or comfort. In short, the Thunderbolt wasn't just a car. It was a warning shot from an era when horsepower was everything, and control was an afterthought. And for that reason, it remains one of the most fascinating and fearsome Fords ever built. Number 8. The Ford Galaxie 500 was one of the quintessential American full-size cars of the 1960s. Long, loud, and unashamedly powerful. It was built for straight-line speed, not finesse, and it symbolized an era when Detroit engineers cared more about horsepower than handling, braking, or safety. From 1963 through 1969, the Galaxie 500 transformed from a family cruiser into a high-speed land missile. With the available 427 cubic inch V8, it could outrun just about anything on the road, including its own ability to stop or turn. And for many unlucky drivers, that imbalance proved deadly. The Galaxie name first appeared in 1959 as Ford's upscale full-size model, meant to compete with the Chevrolet Impala. But by the early 1960s, Ford began transforming the Galaxie into something more than a family sedan. It became a muscle machine before the term existed, blending size, comfort, and raw power. By 1963, Ford engineers were experimenting with lightweight, high-performance versions of the Galaxie for NASCAR and NHRA racing. These included aluminum body panels, fiberglass hoods, and high-compression engines designed for competition, not grocery runs. The Galaxie 500 XL trim even added bucket seats and console shifters, giving the impression that this enormous car could be driven like a sports coupe.
The heart of the beast was the 427 cubic inch FE Series V8 introduced in 1963. Officially rated between 410 and 425 horsepower, its actual output was closer to 450 plus HP in factory race trim. This was the same engine powering Ford's legendary racing programs, from NASCAR Galaxies to the Cobra and GT40. With dual 4-barrel carburetors, solid lifters, and high compression, the 427 turned the Galaxy from a highway cruiser into a barely controllable monster. On the drag strip, it was magnificent. On public roads, it was terrifying. The car could surge past 130 miles per hour, but it still had drum brakes and a softly sprung suspension designed for comfort, not control. The 1933 to 1964 Galaxy 500 was a case study in excess. It weighed nearly 4,200 pounds, yet its massive V8 gave it startling acceleration for its size. Unfortunately, Ford hadn't equipped it with the tools to handle all that power. Braking. The Galaxy used all drum brakes until disc options appeared late in the decade. Under heavy braking, fade was almost guaranteed, meaning the brakes would overheat and lose effectiveness after just a few hard stops. Steering. Overly assisted power steering made the car feel light and disconnected, giving drivers a false sense of control. Handling. The suspension was soft and floaty, causing body roll and poor grip during turns. Combined with bias ply tires, it was a recipe for disaster when pushed too hard. As a result, the Galaxy gained a reputation for instability at high speeds. Accidents, particularly single-car crashes on highways, were not uncommon. Drivers would accelerate down straight stretches, hit a curve, or need to stop suddenly, and the car simply wouldn't respond in time. Ford's performance division used the Galaxy 500 as its racing showcase in the early 1960s. In NASCAR, the car dominated when piloted by professional drivers like Fred Lorenzen and Ned Jarrett, who could handle its brute force. However, those race-prepped Galaxies were heavily modified, featuring roll cages, upgraded brakes, and purpose-built suspensions. The showroom versions looked similar but shared almost none of those improvements. Consumers bought them thinking they were buying a NASCAR car for the street and quickly learned the hard way that they weren't. By 1965, the Galaxy grew even larger, gaining Ford's new torque box frame and more luxury features. Yet Ford continued offering big engines like the 390, 406, and 428 Cobra Jet options. The later 1967 to 1969 Galaxy 500s were enormous highway cruisers, often topping 4,500 pounds. But the 427 and 428 engines remained optional for those who wanted bragging rights. On American interstates, these cars could devour miles effortlessly, but on twisty roads or wet pavement, they were dangerous beasts. Even Ford's own test data from the time acknowledged that the Galaxy's stopping distances and cornering ability were below ideal for the power output. Newspapers in the 1960s occasionally mentioned Galaxy crash fatalities, often describing violent rollovers or head-on collisions following loss of control at high speed. The car's weight distribution, with a heavy front end and light rear, meant traction was inconsistent, especially during sudden maneuvers. Without seatbelts, standardized only later in the decade, or crumple zones, many of those crashes ended tragically. Enthusiasts who saw the Galaxy as a budget race car often underestimated how much training it really required to drive safely. Ford quietly phased out its most extreme setups after 1967, as the muscle car era shifted towards smaller, mid-size platforms like the Fairlane, Torino, and Mustang. Today, the 1933 to 1969 Ford Galaxy 500 stands as a relic of a unique time in American automotive history, when brute power was enough to sell cars and safety engineering was an afterthought.
Collectors admire its sleek lines, powerful engines, and connection to Ford's racing legacy. But even now, enthusiasts know to respect its limitations. Driving one hard requires skill, distance, and caution, because those ancient drum brakes and heavy steering still feel as they did in the 60s. It remains a reminder of when American cars were built for speed, not survival. The 1933 to 1969 Ford Galaxie 500 was a masterpiece of power and excess. A car that could make you feel like a NASCAR hero and kill you just as quickly if you weren't careful. It embodied the contradictions of its time: elegant design, cutting-edge performance, and primitive safety. For Ford, it was both a triumph of engineering and a symbol of why regulations would soon have to change. In short, the Galaxie 500 was a rocket on 4 wheels with brakes from a farm truck. Thrilling, beautiful, and utterly unforgiving. A true giant of the muscle era.
Number 7. In the late 1960s, Detroit's carmakers were locked in a horsepower war, and Ford's entry into this high-octane arena was the Torino Cobra Jet. Born from the company's mid-sized Torino line, this machine was designed to dominate the drag strip and intimidate anything that dared pull up beside it at a stoplight. On paper, it was everything a muscle car should be: big, loud, and unapologetically powerful. But beneath the roar of its 429 cubic inch Cobra Jet V8 lurked a danger that made it one of the most intimidating and at times deadly muscle cars of its era. At the center of the Torino's madness was Ford's 429 Cobra Jet engine, a monster rated at 370 horsepower, though actual output was far higher, often exceeding 450 HP in real-world conditions. This wasn't a car for the casual driver. The engine could catapult the Torino from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just over 5.5 seconds, a stunning figure for the early 1970s, especially for a car weighing well over 3,800 pounds. But all that power came with a price. The Cobra Jet's massive torque, over 450 pound-foot, was more than the chassis could gracefully handle. When drivers stomped the throttle, the car would twist, squat, and often veer unpredictably. This wasn't due to poor maintenance or driver error. It was a fundamental flaw in its engineering priorities: speed first, stability second. The Torino Cobra Jet suffered from terrible weight distribution, with the majority of its mass over the front axle. The heavy big block engine and relatively soft rear suspension meant that at high speeds, the front end could feel planted, but the rear end turned floaty and unpredictable. This wasn't due to poor maintenance or driver error. It was a fundamental flaw in its engineering priorities: speed first, stability second. The Torino Cobra Jet suffered from terrible weight distribution, with the majority of its mass over the front axle. The heavy big block engine and relatively soft rear suspension meant that at high speeds, the front end could feel planted, but the rear end turned floaty and unpredictable. This wasn't due to poor maintenance or driver error. It was a fundamental flaw in its engineering priorities: speed first, stability second. The Torino Cobra Jet suffered from terrible weight distribution, with the majority of its mass over the front axle. The heavy big block engine and relatively soft rear suspension meant that at high speeds, the front end could feel planted, but the rear end turned floaty and unpredictable. At 120 miles and beyond, the car's aerodynamics worked against it. The nose-heavy design and minimal downforce caused rear-end lift, leading to terrifying instability during high-speed runs. This made the car especially dangerous on open highways and drag strips without professional supervision. Many early owners, young enthusiasts with more adrenaline than experience, found out the hard way that the Torino Cobra Jet was not to be trifled with. The Cobra Jet wasn't built for corners. It was built to go straight. Unfortunately, that also meant poor braking and suspension systems. Drum brakes were standard on most models, a cost-saving measure that became a major safety flaw.
Trying to stop a nearly 2-ton missile moving at triple-digit speeds with outdated drums was a recipe for disaster. The suspension, while fine for cruising, was too soft for racing. Body roll was significant, steering feel was vague, and at high speeds, even small bumps could send the car drifting across lanes. It was a car that demanded respect and punishingly punished those who didn't give it enough. Despite, or perhaps because of, its danger, the Torino Cobra Jet developed a near-mythical reputation among muscle car fans. It represented everything raw and unfiltered about American performance in the late 1960s. No electronic assists, traction control, no anti-lock brakes, just engine, metal, and human willpower. Those who could tame it became legends at local drag strips. But the stories of crashes, rollovers, and fatal accidents soon piled up, especially among inexperienced drivers. By the early 1970s, insurance companies had blacklisted cars like the Torino Cobra Jet, effectively pricing them out of the mainstream market. By 1971, the muscle car craze was already in decline. Rising insurance costs, emissions regulations, and public concern about safety ended the days of unchecked horsepower. The Torino Cobra Jet faded away, replaced by tamer, more manageable models. Yet, the car remains a symbol of unrestrained American power, a relic of a time when speed was everything and safety was an afterthought. Today, collectors prize the Cobra Jet for its sheer audacity. It stands as both a testament to engineering ambition and a cautionary tale about the limits of control. The 1968 to 1971 Ford Torino Cobra Jet wasn't just a car, it was a statement. Bold, brash, and dangerous. It offered pure mechanical thrill unmatched with anything modern, but it also embodied the reckless side of the muscle car era. In a world now dominated by smooth, computer-controlled EVs, the Torino Cobra Jet reminds us what it felt like when driving was raw, risky, and truly thrilling.
Number 6. In 1960, Ford launched the Falcon, a small, no-frills compact car that was supposed to bring sensible, affordable transportation to Middle America. It was light, cheap, and efficient, 3 things Detroit rarely offered in one package during that era. But beneath its modest charm, the Falcon hid a dangerous flaw: its fragile, unsafe structure. What Ford sold as economy would, for many owners, turn out to be a mechanical gamble with their lives. The late 1950s brought a shift in American automotive taste. Imports like the Volkswagen Beetle were gaining popularity for their simplicity and fuel economy, and Detroit needed an answer. Ford's response was the Falcon, a minimalist compact introduced for 1960. The goal was straightforward: build a light, inexpensive car that could appeal to families, first-time buyers, and returning servicemen on a budget. At just over 2,400 pounds, the Falcon was smaller and cheaper than any previous Ford, costing less than $2,000 brand new. But that price came at a cost. Everything that wasn't absolutely necessary was stripped away. There were no structural reinforcements, no crumple zones, and few safety features. The engineering focus was cost-cutting, not crash survival. The Falcon's body was made from thin-gauge steel to reduce weight and improve fuel economy. But this lightweight approach meant the car offered almost no protection in a collision. In frontal impacts, the steering column often acted as a spear, driving straight into the driver's chest. In side impacts, the doors could crumple like soda cans. Crash tests, primitive by today's standards, revealed that the passenger cabin often collapsed entirely under moderate impact speeds. Unlike the Volvo PV544 or even the Chevrolet Courier, which experimented with stronger structures, Ford's Falcon relied on old-fashioned body-on-frame simplicity, but without the strength that larger cars had. The result was a dangerously brittle shell that looked fine until something went wrong. When Ford engineers designed the Falcon, safety was not a marketing point. In the early 60s, most buyers didn't think about seat belts or crash zones, and Ford took advantage of that mindset.
Seatbelts were optional, not standard, and even when installed, they were often poorly anchored to the floor pan, which itself was prone to tearing in a severe crash. Early models didn't have padded dashboards, energy-absorbing steering wheels, or reinforced door beams. The result was grim. Accident statistics began to show that Falcon occupants suffered higher injury and fatality rates than those in other compact cars. In particular, head and chest injuries were common due to the car's weak structure and rigid steering setup. Despite these flaws, the Falcon sold extremely well. It was America's best-selling compact in its early years, with more than 435,000 units sold in 1960 alone. Buyers loved its simplicity, small size, and low maintenance costs. Many families bought Falcons as second cars, and college students embraced them as practical transportation. But as the decade progressed, and as the conversation around vehicle safety began to change, the Falcon's reputation took a turn. Ralph Nader's 1965 book, Unsafe at Any Speed, primarily targeted the Chevrolet Corvair, but his arguments about corporate neglect of safety applied perfectly to the Falcon. Ford had designed a car to meet a price, not a protection standard. By 1964, Ford began phasing out the first-generation Falcon and improving structure and handling in later models. But the damage was done, both literally and figuratively. The Falcon's fragile frame and lack of safety engineering became cautionary tales in the push for federal vehicle safety standards that arrived later in the decade. Ironically, some of the engineering lessons learned from the Falcon's flaws went directly into the design of its successor, the 1965 Ford Mustang, which was based on a modified Falcon platform but featured improved structure and safety options. Today, the Falcon is remembered as both a pioneer and a problem, the car that brought economy motoring to the American mainstream, but at the cost of driver safety. It symbolized the industry's attitude before regulation: cheap first, safety later. The 1960 to 1963 Ford Falcon was an honest, practical little car, but a dangerously fragile one. It filled American driveways during a time when affordability mattered more than protection. Looking back, it serves as a stark reminder of how far vehicle safety has come. Modern cars can crash at 60 miles per hour and keep passengers alive. The Falcon, by contrast, could barely withstand a 30-mile impact without crumpling completely. For all its historical significance, the Falcon's true legacy isn't its sales success. It's the uncomfortable lesson it taught the auto industry: safety can't be optional.
Number 5. When you think of classic American pickup trucks, few images are more iconic than the Ford F-100. The clean lines, the bold grille, and the simple strength that came to define the blue-collar American dream. Between 1953 and 1966, Ford's F-100 helped shape what a pickup truck was supposed to be: dependable, handsome, and tough. But behind that reputation for durability lay a darker, rarely discussed truth. These early F-100s had critical mechanical flaws that turned them from trusted workhorses into potential death traps, especially on rural roads. In 1953, Ford retired its long-running F1 designation and replaced it with a new model line, the F100. This wasn't just a name change, it was a redesign aimed at the post-war driver who wanted a truck that could serve both farm and family duty. It was sleeker and more stylish than the purely utilitarian trucks of the 1940s. The 1953 F-100 offered improved comfort, a larger cab, and even optional two-tone paint. Ford wanted it to appeal not only to farmers and ranchers, but also to small business owners and suburban buyers who might use it as an everyday vehicle. But this modernization came with compromises, especially in the mechanical and safety engineering. Ford built the F-100 tough, but not necessarily smart. One of the most serious issues with early F-100s, particularly models built between 1953 and 1956, was steering column failure.
The design used a long, solid metal shaft that ran directly from the steering wheel into the steering box. Over time, with vibration and wear, the coupling at the steering box could loosen or fail altogether, sometimes without warning. Imagine driving down a 2-lane rural road with a full load in the bed and suddenly realizing that your steering wheel is spinning freely in your hands, connected to nothing. For some unlucky drivers, this wasn't a nightmare scenario, but a grim reality. Adding to the danger, the solid steel column had another hazard. In a frontal collision, it could impale the driver. Unlike modern collapsible steering columns, these early systems had no give. When the heavy front of the truck absorbed impact, the column often drove backward into the driver's chest, a tragic flaw that wouldn't be addressed until later in the 1960s. The other fatal flaw was in the braking system. All F-100s of this era used drum brakes on all 4 wheels, a setup that was already being questioned by the mid-1950s as speeds increased and trucks got heavier. The F-100's front-heavy design, with its large cast-iron V8 engine, put enormous stress on the front brakes. The drum brakes overheated easily, especially when hauling loads or descending hills. Once hot, they lost stopping power, a condition known as brake fade. Rural accident records from the 1950s and early 1960s are filled with grim accounts of farmers, ranchers, and delivery drivers who lost control of their F-100s after the brakes failed to hold. The combination of poor weight balance, fading drums, and limited steering control often meant that even minor emergencies turned fatal. By the time Ford introduced front disc brakes on its trucks in the 1970s, the lesson had already been learned the hard way. What makes the F-100's story so striking is that it was, and still is, celebrated for its reliability. These trucks could haul heavy loads, survive decades of abuse, and still start up every morning. But reliable didn't mean safe. Farmers praised them for toughness, but many families mourned the loss of loved ones due to mechanical design oversights that Ford didn't publicly acknowledge at the time. There were no recalls, no safety campaigns, and no government regulations requiring safety improvements. Those would come only after the 1966 creation of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. The F-100, in many ways, represents the American automotive mindset of the 1950s: durability over safety, power over control. Despite its flaws, the F-100 became a symbol of American life. It was the truck you saw on farms, construction sites, and main streets across the country. It was affordable, strong, and easy to repair. But those very traits, simplicity and ruggedness, also masked deeper design problems. Ford engineers prioritized mechanical toughness and visual appeal over handling and braking performance. The F-100 could take a beating, but it wasn't designed to avoid one. Later generations, particularly after 1966, would introduce safer steering systems, stronger braking components, and eventually power-assisted discs that brought the F-Series into the modern era. Today, the early F-100s are beloved by collectors and restorers. Their timeless styling, bulletproof engines, and emotional connection to post-war America make them valuable classics. But every polished 1956 F-100 you see at a car show carries an invisible history, one written in rural accident reports and unrecorded fatalities on dirt roads. The truck that symbolized America's work ethic also revealed the cost of a nation that valued performance and practicality over safety. The 1953 through 1966 Ford F-100 stands as a mechanical paradox, a vehicle both heroic and hazardous. It built America's farms, carried its goods, and hauled its dreams. But it also served as a painful reminder that true progress in automotive design means protecting the people behind the wheel, not just moving their cargo. The early Ford F-100 wasn't just a truck.
It was a symbol of an era before safety mattered. Its steering and brake flaws weren't mere inconveniences. They were the difference between life and death for thousands of hard-working Americans. As we admire its classic beauty today, it's important to remember the lesson it taught the industry, that even the toughest truck must first and foremost be safe.
Number 4. In the early 1970s, the Ford LTD was the very image of American prestige, a massive, chrome-laden sedan that symbolized comfort, status, and quiet power. It was the kind of car suburban families aspired to own, the kind executives wanted in their driveways. Yet, beneath that thick sheet metal and polished trim lay a deeply flawed machine, one that became notorious for its poor handling, weak braking, and fatal accident record. The LTD didn't just dominate the roads, it often destroyed everything in its path, earning the chilling nickname, the Rolling Coffin. By 1970, American car design had reached its maximum scale. Bigger meant better, more comfort, more presence, more prestige. The Ford LTD embodied that philosophy perfectly. Measuring nearly 19 feet long and weighing up to 4,800 pounds, it was a full-sized sedan built for luxury cruising. Ford marketed the LTD as a quiet ride, with soft suspension, thick sound insulation, and an interior that felt more like a living room than a cockpit. The LTD's V8 engines, ranging from the 351 to the monstrous 460 cubic inches, promised effortless power. Drivers were told they were surrounded by strength, comfort, and safety. But this illusion of invincibility was exactly what made the LTD so dangerous. The physics didn't lie. A 2.5-ton car with primitive suspension, weak drum brakes, and vague steering was a recipe for disaster on American highways. The 1970s LTD was a paradox, massive in size but mechanically outdated. Its power steering was overboosted, giving drivers a light, disconnected feel that masked how slowly the car actually responded to inputs. The braking system, especially on early models, still relied on drum brakes in the rear, which overheated easily under the LTD's weight. At highway speeds, this created terrifying situations. Drivers who believed they could stop or swerve in time discovered too late that their car's size worked against them. The LTD's long wheelbase and soft suspension made emergency maneuvers unpredictable. The front end would dive under braking, while the rear floated, sometimes swinging out of control. Accident investigators in the mid-1970s found that the LTD's size often gave its drivers a false sense of security, leading to overconfidence behind the wheel. When collisions occurred, especially with smaller cars, the results were catastrophic. The Ford LTD's reputation for lethality wasn't an exaggeration. By the mid-1970s, it had become infamous in crash data and police reports for its involvement in high-speed, high-fatality collisions. The car's sheer mass meant that in two vehicle crashes, the LTD almost always won. Smaller compacts like the Chevrolet Vega, Pinto, or Datsun 510 were obliterated when struck by the towering Ford. But winning a crash didn't mean walking away unhurt. The LTD's rigid body-on-frame design transmitted huge impact forces directly to its occupants. Without crumple zones, airbags, or energy-absorbing steering columns, standardized only later in the decade, passengers in an LTD often suffered fatal internal injuries even in survivable speed crashes. It earned the dark nickname Rolling Coffin among state troopers and emergency responders, a grim acknowledgement that its outdated structure made it deadly for both its passengers and anyone unfortunate enough to meet it head-on. The early 1970s were a turning point in automotive safety and efficiency, but Ford, like most American automakers, was slow to adapt. While European and Japanese manufacturers were adopting unit body construction, disc brakes, and smaller engines, Ford clung to the idea that bigger and heavier meant better and safer. This mindset proved disastrous when the 1973 oil crisis hit.
The LTD's 460 cubic engine could drink fuel at rates as low as 8 miles per gallon, and its bulk made it clumsy in city driving. Sales began to decline, but the safety concerns lingered even longer. Only in the late 1970s, with tightening federal safety standards, did Ford begin redesigning the LTD to include better brakes, improved crash protection, and slightly smaller dimensions. But by then, the rolling coffin stigma had already taken hold. Throughout the 1970s, accident data repeatedly showed that large American sedans like the LTD were overrepresented in fatal multi-vehicle crashes. In part, this was due to their sheer numbers on the road, but also because their mass, poor handling, and lack of modern safety systems made them harder to control and deadlier in collisions. For families who bought LTDs believing they were buying safe cars, the truth was devastating. The combination of poor stopping power, excessive weight, and soft suspension tuning often led to crashes that could have been avoided in smaller, nimbler cars. It wasn't uncommon to see rural police reports from the era describing head-on collisions where the LTD drove over the compact, a tragic consequence of mismatched vehicle design philosophies. Today, the 1970 to 1964 Ford LTD is admired by collectors for its imposing looks and nostalgic charm. It represents the last era of unrestrained American luxury, when chrome was thick, engines were enormous, and comfort was king. But the LTD's story is also a cautionary tale, a symbol of Detroit's complacency during a critical time in automotive history. It showed what happened when engineering lagged behind marketing, and when bigger and safer was taken at face value instead of proven through science. The LTD remains both an icon and a warning. It was the apex of American excess, but also a grim reminder of what happens when a vehicle's presence on the road outweighs its ability to protect the people inside it. The 1970 to 1964 Ford LTD was more than just a big car. It represented an entire nation's automotive mindset. It represented power, comfort, and confidence, but also denial. Its poor steering, weak brakes, and heavy structure made it lethal in ways its owners never imagined. In the end, the LTD's story isn't just about design. It's about misplaced trust. The car that promised safety through size proved instead that mass without control is a recipe for tragedy. And so, the rolling coffin lives on in history, a chrome-plated monument to a time when American luxury came at a deadly price.
Number 3. In the 1980s, America's love for compact SUVs was beginning to take off, and Ford wanted to be first in line. The Ford Bronco 2, introduced in 1984, looked like the perfect downsized off-roader, rugged, versatile, and affordable. It shared its platform with the Ford Ranger pickup and was marketed as a sporty, family-friendly SUV for adventurous buyers. But underneath its tough exterior lay one of the most dangerous design flaws in modern automotive history. The Bronco 2's compact size was supposed to make it nimble and practical for suburban families. But Ford engineers made a critical compromise. They kept the track width, distance between the wheels, narrow while maintaining a relatively tall ride height. This combination raised the vehicle's center of gravity dramatically. On paper, that might not sound catastrophic, but on the road, it meant the Bronco 2 was inherently unstable. Even moderate swerves or sudden lane changes could throw it off balance. Add in the light rear end typical of SUVs of the era, and the Bronco 2 became a rollover waiting to happen. It didn't take long for the disaster to unfold. Drivers reported rollovers during normal driving, turning onto ramps, dodging potholes, or reacting to traffic. Investigations revealed that the Bronco 2 was nearly twice as likely to roll over as many other vehicles in its class. By the late 1980s, hundreds of deaths and thousands of injuries had been linked to Bronco 2 rollovers. Lawsuits piled up. Ford quietly paid settlements, often without admitting fault. And internal documents later revealed that engineers had warned management about stability problems before production even began. In one chilling test, Ford's own engineers rolled the prototype over during pre-production handling evaluations. Their recommendations for widening the track or lowering the suspension were rejected because it would have cost a few $1,000,000 and delayed release. The media began to take notice. Consumer Reports and safety advocates condemned the Bronco 2 as one of the most unstable vehicles ever sold to the public. Yet Ford refused to issue a recall, maintaining that the rollovers were caused by driver error. Behind the scenes, however, Ford quietly prepared a replacement, the Ford Explorer, launched in 1990. With a wider stance, better stability, and updated safety systems, it was effectively an apology in steel and glass. But by then, the damage to the Bronco 2's reputation and Ford's safety record was irreversible. Today, the Bronco 2 is remembered less for its ruggedness and more for its role in shaping modern SUV safety standards. Its catastrophic failure led to stricter rollover resistance tests by the NHTSA, mandatory stability control systems in later decades, a permanent change in how automakers balance center of gravity with vehicle width. The 1984 to 1990 Ford Bronco 2 stands as a grim lesson in automotive ethics, proof that cost-cutting and corporate denial can kill. It was meant to be the people's off-roader, but it became a symbol of negligence on wheels. For Ford, the Bronco 2's legacy remains a shadow over its SUV's lineage, a reminder that no amount of marketing spin can overcome physics or the price of ignoring engineers' warnings.
Number 2. In the late 1950s, Ford decided to reinvent the American car market with a brand new division called Edsel. Marketed as the car of the future, the Edsel promised style, innovation, and prestige. It featured quirky designs, unique badging, and new engineering ideas intended to set it apart from the Chevrolet and Plymouths dominating the middle-class market. Yet beneath the glossy advertising and extravagant styling, the Edsel harbored serious mechanical flaws that would cement its reputation as one of the biggest automotive failures in history. Ford's goal with the Edsel was ambitious: create a car that could capture an entirely new market segment, the upper middle-class buyer who wanted to stand out. It offered distinctive styling, including the famously controversial horse-collar grille and futuristic instrumentation. Its lineup included sedans, station wagons, and the rare Citation model, aiming to cover every possible niche. Ford invested heavily in marketing, launching a nationwide advertising blitz that promised a revolutionary driving experience. But in striving for uniqueness, Ford compromised on fundamental engineering principles. One of the most dangerous aspects of the Edsel was its unpredictable steering. Early models had a recirculating ball steering system that was poorly tuned. Drivers reported wandering and delayed response, especially at high speeds or during sudden lane changes. On slippery roads, the Edsel could suddenly veer without warning, causing minor fender benders or severe accidents. The handling problems were exacerbated by the car's long wheelbase and heavy front end. The Edsel weighed over 3,500 pounds, with most of that weight concentrated over the front wheels. This made quick maneuvers treacherous, particularly for drivers unfamiliar with its quirks. Equally alarming were the Edsel's braking issues. Early Edsels used hydraulic drum brakes that were prone to overheating on long descents or repeated stops. Brake fade was common. In some cases, the pedal would feel spongy or sink to the floor. Combined with the car's weight and steering unpredictability, this created a recipe for catastrophic accidents, particularly at highway speeds. There were documented reports of fatal collisions caused by the Edsel's steering and brake failures. While exact numbers are difficult to verify, internal Ford memos from the era expressed concern that the car's reputation for accidents could hurt sales, and indeed, it did. Mechanical flaws weren't the only problem.
The Edsel also suffered from market misjudgment. Ford misread consumer desires, producing a car that was neither luxury nor economy. Build quality issues. Some units had misaligned panels, leaky roofs, and premature rusting. Overhyped marketing. The car's futuristic appeal did not resonate with buyers, who expected reliability over novelty. All of this compounded the mechanical shortcomings, ensuring that the Edsel's reputation for unreliability and danger would linger for decades. The Edsel is now synonymous with failure, but its story teaches critical lessons about automotive design. Innovation cannot compromise safety. No matter how unique or flashy a car appears, the basics, steering, braking, and handling must come first. Consumer trust is fragile. The Edsel's combination of mechanical issues and overpromising advertising turned buyers away permanently. Corporate hubris is costly. Ford poured massive resources into a car that couldn't deliver, financially and reputationally. Interestingly, some Edsels survive today as collector cars, admired for their styling rather than their driving experience. But even in museums, their dangerous engineering quirks remain part of their history. The 1958 to 1960 Ford Edsel was a bold attempt to reshape the American automotive landscape. It looked futuristic, offered a wide range of options, and promised an innovative driving experience. Yet its steering quirks, brake failures, and overall mechanical instability turned it into a car that sometimes harmed the very people it was meant to impress.
Number 1. In the 1970s, Ford sought to expand into the compact pickup market. Japanese imports were gaining traction with small, efficient trucks like the Toyota Hilux and Datsun 620, and Ford wanted a piece of that market. The result was the Ford Courier, sold from 1972 to 1982, a rebadged Mazda B-Series truck that promised affordability, maneuverability, and the utility of a pickup in a smaller, easier-to-drive package. On paper, it was a clever move. In practice, it was a deceptively dangerous vehicle. The Courier was marketed as light and nimble, easy for city driving and tight suburban spaces. Economical, offering fuel efficiency far superior to Ford's larger trucks like the F-100 or F-150. Affordable, giving first-time truck buyers an entry into the Ford lineup. Its small stature and cute design made it attractive to young drivers, small business owners, and urban dwellers. But beneath its charming exterior lay structural compromises that would haunt its drivers. The Courier's lightweight Mazda-built chassis allowed for efficiency, but at a terrible cost in crashes. The compact frame had minimal crumple zones. In head-on collisions, it absorbed almost no impact energy. Its light weight made it more likely to be overpowered by larger vehicles like mid-sized sedans or full-size trucks. Statistics from the 1970s indicate that small pickups like the Courier had disproportionately high fatality rates in two-vehicle accidents compared to their larger Ford siblings. Drivers who survived low-speed fender benders sometimes did so only by sheer luck, not design. Perhaps the most insidious danger was the Courier's non-collapsible steering column. In severe collisions, the steering shaft could drive directly into the driver's chest, causing catastrophic injury. Unlike later vehicles that incorporated energy-absorbing or collapsible columns, the Courier system prioritized simplicity and cost over safety. This flaw turned what many considered a cute, safe little truck into a potentially lethal hazard, especially for inexperienced drivers. Ford advertised the Courier as a practical, economical truck suitable for everyday tasks. The reality, however, was starkly different. While it could carry light loads and navigate tight streets easily, its structural weaknesses meant that minor accidents could quickly escalate into life-threatening situations. The very qualities that made it attractive, lightness, small size, affordability, also made it one of the most vulnerable vehicles in collisions.
Ford did not publicly address these issues at the time, and safety testing for compact trucks in the 1970s was minimal. Drivers had little way of knowing that their vehicle's design could turn a minor crash fatal. The Ford Courier story is both a cautionary tale and a reflection of its era. It shows the dangers of prioritizing cost and convenience over structural safety. It highlights the risks of badge engineering and relying on foreign platforms without thorough adaptation for domestic safety standards. It reminds us that even small, everyday vehicles, cute pickups or compact sedans, can carry hidden risks invisible to consumers. After the Courier era, Ford redesigned its compact pickups with improved frames, safer steering columns, and better crash performance, learning painfully that lightweight does not equal safe. The Ford Courier, 1972 to 1982, occupies a peculiar place in automotive history. It was beloved for its size, affordability, and ease of use. Yet its very charm masked a hidden danger. Its light frame and rigid steering column turned everyday collisions into life-threatening events, making it one of Ford's most deceptively hazardous vehicles of the era. The Courier reminds us that in automotive design, economy and convenience must never come at the expense of fundamental safety, and that even cute trucks can carry a deadly legacy.